With Belarus, we have a very good relationship. And
Conditions for them?
I like the leader a lot.
John, it's as if there were no war at all.
He likes to toast with the vodka like you see in the movies.
That role should be embraced in terms of Belarusian potential to act as a buffer state.
Hello and welcome to Independence Avenue Media. My name is Kirill Sukhotsky. The United States has changed its script on Belarus. After years of treating Russia's ally as a pariah state, President Donald Trump's administration is now engaging directly with Belarusian strongman leader Alexander Lukashenko. Last June, the White House sent a former special envoy, Keith Kellogg, to Belarus in the first high-ranking U.S. official visit in more than 5 years. This was followed by multiple visits by another Trump special envoy, John Coale, who has held many hours of talks with Lukashenko, eventually securing the release of more than 500 political prisoners. During his latest visit in March, Coale said that great progress with relations with Belarus has been achieved. It was April 2005 when then Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, serving in another Republican administration, that of George W. Bush, labeled Belarus the last true remaining dictatorship in the heart of Europe. Now, more than 2 decades later, that same regime in Belarus has arguably become even more brutal and is actively aiding Russia in its aggression against Ukraine. So what has changed in Washington's approach? When Trump was asked at the end of February whether he was planning to restore ties with Belarus, this was his response.
I have a good relationship, and the leader is somebody that I have a lot of respect for. With Belarus, we have a very good relationship. And
Conditions for them?
I like the leader a lot.
A month later, after John Coale's visit ended in another prison release, President Trump posted on Truth Social thanking Lukashenko for what he called a graceful prisoner release, calling him highly respected president and saying he looks forward to meeting him at the next Board of Peace meeting. Coale hinted at the prospect of an invitation to Washington during his most recent visit to Minsk, while Lukashenko mentioned a big deal is in the works between him and Trump's White House.
John, it's as if there were no war at all. It seems to have absolutely no effect on you. I'm always ready to discuss any issues and respond to any problems. I'd very much like you to relay my opinion to Donald Trump. Despite certain mistakes made by the United States, I'm a supporter of your president.
Upon his return to the United States, having just negotiated the release of hundreds of Belarusian political prisoners, John Coale described his talks with Lukashenko in a speech at the Conservative Political Action Conference, an important event for grassroots supporters of President Trump.
So I meet this guy, Lukashenko. He is the president of Belarus. He's been pretty much president there for 30 years, which tells you a lot. He's very good friends with Putin and Xi of China. They kind of have an old dictators club. So the State Department told me, look, the guy likes to yuck it up. He's got a sense of humor. So I did my stand-up routine with him. We talked about getting this one American out, which took about 6-7 hours. He likes to toast with the vodka like you see in the movies. And I got the guy out. Then I saw that I had built a relationship which is pure Trump. I mean, building relationships with oppositions.
So what does the Trump administration want from this relationship with Belarus, and how realistic should Washington be? I spoke about this with Mark Episkopos, a research fellow at the Quincy Institute in Washington, who recently argued that Belarus may become one of Trump's most underrated diplomatic wins. What do you think is happening right now between the United States and Belarus?
I think there's been a massive shift in the way that the White House and the U.S. foreign policy establishment perceives U.S.-Belarus relations, and it's part of a broader recalibration. of U.S. interests and approaches to the post-Soviet space, to NATO's eastern flank. There used to be a focus on this kind of black and white narrative of Euro-Atlantic integration. Either you accept the full package of the European Union, a process of NATO accession, or you are perceived as a malignant or hostile or adversarial actor. And this administration has flipped the script when it comes to looking at this region in that way. It is instead pursuing a set of pragmatic, concrete relationships premised on mutual economic benefit, mutually beneficial diplomatic agreements, political agreements, but it does so in ways that are shaped by certain guardrails, which I think are good for the process and good for a long-term responsible strategy of really having a concrete idea of how much attention we want to devote to this region. This U.S.-Belarus relationship, this process of rapprochement that began really when President Trump took office in early 2025, is based on precisely these principles of we can have a good relationship based on a narrow set of shared objectives and interests that the United States wants to pursue without falling into the traps of the past several decades that made it impossible to have that kind of relationship.
So what are those U.S. interests that the White House is trying to pursue in Belarus, and what are those guardrails that you mentioned just before?
The United States is in a process of retrenchment away from Europe, of reprioritizing away from Europe. This is happening quite quickly now because of Iran, but it was happening even before Iran. It was made clear to our European partners that American interests lie much more keenly, much more sharply in the Indo-Pacific, with the U.S.-China relationship, but also in the Western Hemisphere. And therefore, some reprioritization, diversion of resources has to take place. But in order for this to take place, there has to be some degree of stability on NATO's eastern flank. And one key source of instability is this security spiral that has been unfolding between Belarus and its Western neighbors, particularly Poland and Lithuania. And that has to be addressed. We talk a lot about the Belarusian balcony. And what we mean by this is that Belarus has historically been a staging ground for European invasions into Russia, but also potentially for Russian aggressive actions against its Western neighbors. And that this balcony has to be managed in some way to prevent us from heading into a more dangerous security situation on NATO's eastern flank. It started with the humanitarian issues, and those are important. I would not discount for a second that real progress has been made. Numerous prisoners have been released, and that's very good. But the overall objective, as I see it, and I only speak for myself here, is to arrive at a improved security, more stable security situation between our NATO partners on NATO's eastern flank and Belarus.
So would that mean sort of pulling away Belarus from Russia in some shape or form exactly to sort of neutralize the threat to some NATO countries that may come from Russia through that Belarusian balcony?
Well, I think we have to be realistic about what can be achieved. This administration, I think, is under no illusion that Russia gets a big vote in how this unfolds. Russia has a massive military presence in Belarus. More recently, there has been a stationing of Russian Oreshnik nuclear systems in Belarus. And if you push too hard in this direction, you're going to get a really ugly counter reaction. And that was one of the lessons of the 2020 protests that unfolded after the elections in Belarus. And it's quite clear to me, as someone who has studied this issue and looked at it very closely for the past couple of years, that if Russia perceives a real collapse of the current government, of the current state structure in Belarus. It will take drastic measures at that point. We could see potentially some kind of a invasion of Belarus. We could see some kind of hybrid military operation, Russian hybrid military operation, but it would be ugly. I think it would not be in anyone's interest, and it would make the region more dangerous.
How realistic, in that regard, how realistic would be that feeling that Belarus and Lukashenko wants to pursue a separate rapprochement with the West, independent of Russia? You know, we saw that Lukashenko was very friendly with visiting Special Envoy John Coale, but then immediately went to North Korea and was even more friendly with Kim Jong-un. Can the Trump White House trust Lukashenko, or Lukashenko is just trying to play this administration?
Well, my rule of thumb is you shouldn't trust anyone. You should look at what their interests are, how their interests align with yours, and if there is a possibility for some kind of a feasible, reasonable cooperation. And in this case, I think there is, precisely because you're absolutely right. Russia has tremendous influence over its Belarusian partner, and Belarus is constrained in what it can do, and it has to operate in those constraints. However, Russia does not have a complete veto over Belarusian foreign policy. Belarus can, in the context of its multi-vector foreign policy, pursue a meaningfully better relationship, especially economically, diplomatically, politically, with the West, with Europe, and with the United States, in ways that Russia cannot directly or easily override. And so my advice would be to focus on those areas, would be to establish commercial ties, cultural ties, trade ties in ways that give Belarus options, not for the purpose of turning Belarus into another Poland or another Czechia or one of the Baltic states. That's never going to happen. Belarus is always going to be a swing player. It's always going to be at the periphery of NATO, and that should be embraced. That role should be embraced. In terms of Belarusian potential to act as a buffer state.
President Lukashenko was talking after Coale's visit to Minsk about some big deal with the Trump administration. What that big deal, what can it entail? And does Washington actually expect some sort of a big deal with Belarus?
You know, I think we have to look at baby steps. It's a very complex process. Change, I think, is unfolding. We are seeing a different approach, but it's going to unfold quite slowly, especially because U.S. attention is now being diverted in a very major way to events unfolding in the Middle East. So I, right now, would not be talking about a grand bargain between Belarus and the United States, where it's still probably too early to be ambitious when it comes to that. If the Ukraine war is settled, I think that would increase the chances for a much faster and more deeper rapprochement between the United States and Belarus. But for now, I think everyone is looking at baby steps. And the next baby step would be a greater degree of diplomatic normalization between the United States and Belarus. We're talking now about a potential visit by President Lukashenko to the United States. And that is not something you plan unless you have a concrete, pretty major deliverable to accompany it. And the most immediate, the most obvious deliverable that stands out to me is diplomatic normalization. So we have a full ambassador in Minsk, and Belarus will have a full ambassador in Washington. That, to me, is the next logical step, and one that paves the way for potentially more progress on the issues that so far have not been touched on.